All right, we are moving into chapter 11. I will say one more thing before we jump into 11. In between chapters 10 and 11 is Atlas B, which goes from page 373 all the way to 394. Some very good pictures that are showing you some specific anatomical details. Everything from the actual face, like what are the different structures on the face called, some in-depth body structures, like for example, if you look on page 381, you can see that psoas major muscle, which I talked about as being a hip flexor, right? But you can see that muscle is right next to the spine that runs between the spine and the pelvis, psoas major. So you can see that there. There is a number of pictures that are showing you surface anatomy, so you can see the actual different pieces of both guys and girls, what they look like with different markings. Are you with me? Because you actually can see different structures, different muscles on the surface anatomy. Sure, sometimes, and again, this is different on every person. Are you with me? If we looked at every single one of us and tried to find a certain mark, we wouldn't find it. It would look different on every person. That's part of the joy of working in medicine is everyone's different. You know, you have to be able to find those pieces. All right? So I just want to point that out. I'm not testing you over that or anything, but just so you knew it was there. There's some good pieces that are there. All right, so let's dive into the muscle tissue. And what I think is interesting about this chapter is now we're learning actually how muscles work. Notice they're going opposite than they did for bones. Bones, we did how bones worked first and then learned the names. Here we're doing the opposite. So some universal characteristics, things that all muscles must have. There are these 5 pieces. They must have excitability. In other words, they must be responsive. Okay? When a nerve sends a signal, the muscle has to actually respond, to do something, to contract, right? They must be able to be conductive so that when that wave of excitement comes, it has to be able to be transferred throughout the muscle. In other words, only one little spot in the nerve, in the muscle, is innervated. It then has to spread that signal through the whole entire muscle fibers. Contractility, which this is kind of a duh, that's the whole point of muscles, right? They have to shorten. They contract when they're stimulated. Extensibility. They have to be able to stretch, to be able to return back to, that's kind of elasticity, the returning to its original rest length. But you also have to be able to stretch muscles. If you couldn't stretch, well, I think about my lovely tight hamstrings, right? Like this is I can't go about much further than that. That's how tight I am today. You can do some stretching, obviously, right? But muscles have that ability to stretch. And the more you work on that, those of you who are gymnasts, you know, the more I work on that stretching, the more flexible the muscle gets. That is, again, that extensibility characteristic. Sir? I'm sure it does. Yeah, sure. I'm good with that. Okay, so the main piece of this chapter is dealing with skeletal muscle. Remember, there's 3 kinds of muscle. Do you remember the 3? Skeletal, smooth, and cardiac. These are our 3, right? So we're going to touch briefly the very end of this study guide on smooth and cardiac. We got whole chapters on the cardiac muscle, right? I.e. the heart, right? But we'll talk briefly also about smooth muscles. But mostly we're talking about skeletal. What makes skeletal interesting? Well, they are voluntary. In other words, I can control. I say bend your elbow, you can bend your elbow, right? They are striated, so when we look at them under the microscope, we see this nice striped pattern. That's really all we mean by striated, okay? And they are attached to bones, which is, again, is kind of like a duh. They're made up of things called muscle fibers or myofibers. And again, your textbook uses a bunch of different words to mean the same thing. Okay, so that's why there's a number of things I have in parentheses. Some things even have two names in parentheses because they use these different names depending on what they're talking about. Why? I get you. I hear you. All right? And a muscle cell can be as long as 30 centimeters. That's 10 inches, over 10 inches in length. That's pretty impressive. That's one cell. It's pretty big. Pretty impressive, these muscle cells, right? So we break them down into smaller pieces. All right? We'll begin with these fibers themselves. So the muscle fibers contain bundles of myofilaments called myofibers, right? I think I moved past here. You're going to see my lack of preparation because I didn't actually go through these slides before I'm showing them to you. Shh, don't tell anybody. Okay? Remember that we have these connective tissue that's wrap around, right? What you just had some questions about. Endomyosin is around the actual cell itself. The paramyosin takes a bunch of those muscle cells and puts them into fascicles, right? And then you take those fascicles and wrap them all together to make a big muscle itself, and that is wrapped with the epimyosin, right? Good. I'm not sure why we're here. All right, well, let's go here. We're talking about the actual muscle fiber itself. And again, the muscle fiber contains a bundles of these little myofilaments called myofibrils. These little myofibrils are the little pieces that make up the muscle fibers. And they're wrapped in the plasma membrane. Again, think of a cell, right? A cell has this plasma membrane on the outside. For a muscle, that plasma membrane is called the sarcolemma. Are you with me? Sorry? Okay. The sarcoplasma is this, again, cytoplasm, the inside surrounding the gel kind of stuff. Does that make sense? You have nuclei, you have mitochondria. All of these things are kind of packed in between the myofibrils because it's a cell, right? It still needs all the normal things that a cell has, but those are kind of packed around the different myofibrils. The sarcoplasmic reticulum is this smooth endoplasmic reticulum, but we call it the sarcoplasmic reticulum, in the muscle, and it basically connects all the places in the muscle. It's like the little tubules that run through it. The very endings of those are called T-tubules, and you'll see about those when we get to the excitation of how nerves work. Those T-tubules are important. So just showing you the picture, this is here, where is this at in your textbook? This is on page 398. And they're showing you again that zoomed in, this is one muscle fiber. I want to make sure you hear me, okay? That we've zoomed in on. And we're looking at the different pieces. Again, the sarcolemma, the sarcoplasm in between, the T-tubules running through there, the sarcoplasmic reticulum, and then here are the myofibrils that are wrapping up those myofilaments, the individual little pieces. And we'll talk more about those in significant detail. Are you with me so far? So let's talk a bit about these. Oh, question. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're down at the muscle fiber level, certainly. You don't want to go too much more than that because obviously they would have a hard time fixing those pieces. But yeah, you're talking about at the fiber level. Mm-hmm. It's a good question. All right, so let's talk about these myofilaments. You have to be comfortable, and there's, again, great pictures there on page 399 that are showing you that there are two types that we really care about of muscle fibers. There's actually three of them that are listed, these filaments. All right? There you have a thick one, and you have a thin one. And your textbook bops back and forth between calling them thick and thin or by their actual names. The thick ones are called myosin, and the thin ones are called actin. And like I said, your textbook goes back and forth between saying thick, thin, myosin, actin, and you have to be comfortable which of these is which. So let's talk about the thick ones. The thick ones are made of several hundred of these myosin molecules, and each molecule is kind of shaped like a golf club. That you have this handle, and then you have this head. And you put a bunch of those together to make a thick filament. Does that make sense? These little heads kind of stick out, and these heads are super important because these are what actually contract and move the muscle. We'll talk more about this as we move along here. And you can see they're positioned, these thick fibers, in between a group of thin fibers. Those thin fibers being the actin. The actin guys are intertwined. There are two different types of proteins that are intertwined, tropomyosin and troponin, and we'll talk more about these when we talk about how muscles actually work. But those actin have what we call active sites. Active sites are where those myosin heads will reach up and grab onto, bond to, which is basically, again, how muscles work. And we'll talk more about this as we go. But it's very important you understand that the actins have these active sites. It makes sense, right? They sound very similar. Actin, active. And the myosin has the big heads that are reaching up and grabbing there. Okay? So here's a close-up view of one of those thin filaments, the actin filaments. Again, the troponin, the tropomyosins that are wrapped around there. The third myofilament is called an elastic filament. An elastic meaning just what it sounds like, right? It's stretchy, it's springy. It helps hold the myosins in place and allows them to return back to their starting positions after they have contracted. Yes, sir?
I have a question about like the path.
Mm-hmm.
I have a friend who like a born plant called
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And like it affected him in his running.
Excuse me.
Why would that really affect it when the fascia kind of like separates?
So the plantar fascia is a special kind of thing. Let me just give something that I can draw on real quick. Are you comfortable that you have a calcaneus like this, and you have the heads of your metatarsals? I'm looking from the side. Here's the rest of your foot going up here, right? Terrible drawing, I know. Okay, but this is your calcaneus, right? And these are your metatarsal heads, like the very distal end of them. And in here, this is the arch of your foot, right? What connects these two things is called the plantar fascia. It's this very thick band of fascia. So different than just separating muscles, same name. But it basically acts like a spring, that it will, as you step on that, it stretches a bit and then comes back. It stretches and comes back. And that's supposed to be doing that. That's what actually gives your foot that shock absorption to allow you to walk and to run, right? But if that gets irritated, often it gets irritated here on the heel. That's what we call plantar fasciitis. You've heard that before. But you can actually tear that, maybe here, maybe it's up here, maybe it's midline, just depends. Right, sure. So they immobilize it so it'll heal. Yep.
Does it heal like back?
It can, depends on how bad the tear is. Yeah, they can get back to normal with that. Mm-hmm. Sir? So they're not going to have as high of an arch there. So usually they're over-pronated. They have too much inversion. And again, that can cause a whole host of problems. There are branches of sciences that they say, the reason why I'm having neck pain today is because my feet are not working right. It just rolls all the way up the chain. And there's certainly pieces to that. Abby, you had a question? No. Answer. Okay. Yes. All right, good detour. Back into muscles. So here is kind of one look at how these actin and myosins are fitted together. If you were looking in your textbook, this is on page 400. And you have to understand, classicness would be to make you learn all the little pieces of this diagram. Okay? Knowing what a Z-disc is, what an M-line is, what the H-band is. I'm not necessarily interested in you understanding that. Okay? That's memorization I don't want to make you do. But I do want to make sure you understand this arrangement, because this is fundamental. That every muscle in your body, every muscle fiber in your body looks like this. If you take your fingers and you put them together like this is how your muscles are set up initially, right? And when they contract, please hear me, it's this simple. They go from this to this. That's it. Tiny little movement. And then when it relaxes, it goes back. Because we're stretching those elastic fibers when we contract, right? The elastic gets stretched, it goes back to normal after the contraction releases. And that's simply it. It moves these tiny little motions back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Over and over and over and over and over again. Now, the reason why you actually can bend your elbow is because there are millions of those little guys in your bicep muscle that helps move it this far. Does that make sense? So this arrangement is key. The fact that we've got the thick filaments that are surrounded by these thin filaments, but notice the thin filaments are all bundled together on the end. The thick ones are all bundled together in the middle. And again, those pieces all have names, but that's the point. Just like your fingers like this, they slide and then relax. Question or I answer it?
So like, if our muscles are built with fibers, how come you have to eat protein to build it up instead of eating fiber?
So different kind of fiber. When we say fiber, we're talking about this roughage, this kind of undigestible food that our bodies can't actually break down, that gives our feces bulk and moves it through the intestines. Whereas in this case, we're talking about muscle fibers, which are just proteins. The amino acids that are in a protein are what gets broken down and made into our muscle fibers. Two different meanings for the same exact word. Good question. Good question. And in your study guide here, guys, what I want to make sure you hear me. From one, boy, I keep pushing the wrong thing here. From one Z disc to another, this piece right here is called a sarcomere. And that is what we call the functional contractile unit of a muscle fiber. This is what is actually doing the work of a muscle. Does that make sense? Right, because again, these actins, the red ones, right, the thin filaments, will slide together as the thick ones grab up and pull on them. We'll talk about that in a second. And that's what slides these two Z lines or C discs closer together. Those Z discs move closer, the muscle shortens, which means it's contracted. When the Z discs go back to normal, because by shortening, we're stretching those green guys. The green guys are the elastic filaments, right? Once they're stretched, then it goes back to normal. That would be when it's relaxed. We're talking about, so we're talking about the biceps, okay? The contracting of it will be shortening. The two Z discs moving closer together. That would be bending your elbow, flexing your elbow, right? The relaxing would be moving back. Good. And again, you'll hear this sarcomere. They use this term a lot. And again, this is an individual piece of one muscle fiber. So one muscle fiber is made up of thousands of these all together, these sarcomeres. Does that make sense? Good, good, good. I'm moving through some of these pieces because we've covered the pieces I want you to be comfortable with. They spent some time talking about those striations again. And again, it's these different filaments together that give you these different striations. Oh, come on. Okay, let's take a look at this. This is not, I didn't actually put this in your study guide, but this piece, this table 11.1 on page 401, this is a really good summary. Okay? So they are taking you from big to small. And let's look and see what it has here. At the biggest piece, you have the muscle, right? That is the actual organ that's attached to the bones by tendons. You've got these bundles, these fascicles, that are tightly packed and long parallel cells called muscle fibers, right? We all know what muscles are. If I take one of those fascicles out, right, then we're looking here. That fascicle is a bundle of muscle fibers, okay, that again is supplied with blood vessels and nerves, and it's enclosed in the paramecium, right? Remember, the whole muscle is enclosed in what? What wraps around the whole muscle? The connective. The epimecium, right? So now we're going from out to in. So epimecium on the outside, combining the whole muscle, right? We zoom in a bit more, then that individual fascicle is wrapped with paramecium. We pull out one of those muscle fibers from a fascicle. Are you with me? And let's zoom in on that guy now. So a muscle fiber, that's your single muscle cells. Oh, I need to take lunch. Pause. David, you just made me think of that. Thanks for coming in. Wow, my thing is super slow here. Okay, maybe this is not going to work. We'll do it this way. It's not going to work. Sorry, you have to watch this. Just go ahead and blip ahead a few seconds. Uh-oh. We are taking attendance. Am I missing anybody else here? We're all here, right? Other than Diana. I know she's not here. David's here now. Okay, lunch. Who needs lunch? It is penne pasta. I got you, Eloise. Melissa, I've got you. Donnell. Josh Welch. Casey, I got you. Nathan. Carlos. Amar. Camellia, yes. Keenan, got you. Anybody else? All right. Back to our regularly scheduled program. All right. Shh. Come back to me now. I appreciate it. So these muscle fibers, that is your single muscle cell, right? And they're enclosed in that sarcolemma, and they contain densely packed bundles of the myofibrils, right? Multiple nuclei, the sarcoplasmic reticulum, right? Now, if I zoom in further, if I pull out one of those myofibrils, right? That myofibril has got these little filaments in them, right? And those filaments, the thick and the thin, covered by that sarcoplasmic reticulum, right, with the T-tubules on the ends. If I zoom in even more, then I got a sarcomere, right? And the sarcomere, that's the functional contractile unit, right? Hundreds of sarcomeres end to end composing myofibril, right? Remember, it's from Z disc or Z line to Z line, right? That is your sarcomere. If I zoom in even further, now I'm on the myofilaments, the thick and the thin. The thick myosin, the thin actin, with the elastic fibers attached to the thick ones that hold them back into place. Does that make sense? Again, you're just zooming down, 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 down. We can go back up from the bottom and zoom back out again. Are we cool? Okay. We're moving from there into the nerves, the nerve and the muscles together. Okay? A skeletal muscle never contracts unless a nerve tells it to. Okay? It has to be stimulated by a nerve. Okay? If there's that connection is somehow messed up, that muscle is paralyzed. It cannot work. Okay? And when that happens, you get the muscles actually shrink. They wither away. They're not being used, so no need to keep them there. So that can be a buildup of these waste products that are there. It can be caused from, it can be caused from dehydration. There can actually be neurological problems that are causing these cramps, these tightnesses, the muscle cramps that won't let go. Usually it's just you're dehydrated. That's probably the easiest answer for that. But that's still being caused by the nerve. This nerve is still causing that muscle to contract. It just won't let it relax. Okay. We have these nerves that are attached to the muscles, and we call those a motor unit. Sir? Would you? Right. There's some sort of a problem with that muscle that is causing it to just stay contracted. Usually from dehydration. It can be from a buildup of some waste products that are there that just won't let the muscle stop. But yeah. So this motor unit, we call the motor unit one nerve fiber and all the muscles that it innervates. Okay? And again, there's a nice picture of this that's here on page 403 showing you where those nerves are coming in and attaching. Okay? And they are moved all throughout the muscles. Some muscles have lots of nerve input, some have very few, depending on what their plan is. If I need, well, so here's your motor unit they're showing you. From the spinal cord, nerves coming down that are going to different muscle fibers. You can see the green one is only going to a few versus the purple one's going to a large number. This is there on page 402 in your textbook. Okay? If I'm trying to do things that need a fine amount of control, so let's say the muscles to my hands, the ones that are controlling how my fingers are working, right? If I need more fine control, then I have very small motor units. So I have 3 to 5 muscle fibers per nerve. Does that make sense? That nerve is going and is only making a couple of muscle fibers to fire. But if I'm looking just for strength, if I want like just big bulk contractions, like the Costco kind of contractions, right? Then I'm going to send one nerve to 1,000 or even more than 1,000 muscle fibers and get them all to contract at the same time. Right? So like your leg muscles, your quadriceps, there's no reason for you to finely control that. You're mostly wanting to be strengthened. The whole thing contracting at one time. Does that make sense? I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you. So like in your hand is a key piece. I want to be able to finely control how my fingers move in what direction and what way. I don't want the whole thing to just go and tighten my whole hand up. You can, sure, yeah. Think about, my classic example of this is that you have a calibration of how much you lift things. So our refrigerator at home, our milk is in the door of the refrigerator. And you have to lift it up to get it over the shelf to exit it, right? Inevitably, when somebody that I won't name who's in this room puts the milk back with a very little bit of milk in it, I pick it up and I slam it against the thing above. Because you think it's going to be heavier than it is, right? I'm just teasing. He doesn't do that. Rarely, ever. Okay? Does that make sense? So your muscles think, your brain is, oh, this is normally a gallon of milk's pretty heavy. I'm going to use this much force. But in actuality, it's much lighter. You don't need that. Does that make sense? So you can control how much force you put things in. Okay, and when a nerve comes, it's going to stimulate all of the muscle fibers in that motor unit. It can't just do a couple. Any ones it's attached to, they will respond. Does that make sense? Okay, I'm going to stop there because if we keep going next, we're not going to have enough time to get through this piece. Please hear me, guys. Please hear me. I'm encouraging you. You will understand this stuff much better if you have read. Okay, so we're in 11.3 right now. But how these muscle fibers work, so 11.3 and 4, and then moving into 11.5, where we're actually dealing with how the contractions work, It's reasonably complicated. Again, I've done my best to chew it up for you and help you understand it, and we'll talk through it. But the more time you can spend with it, the easier you'll make it to understand. I'll post some videos up for you as well, some good people explaining it, giving you some pictures and all that kind of stuff. All right? I'll stop this guy here. Uh-oh.